I think we should get started so we can get to the reception on time.
The most important thing,
Yeah,
obviously.
it's so wonderful being here. I am so glad that we've had this day together. I have certainly learned a great deal. It's been wonderful to see these conversations playing out and to think deeply about the legacy of Henry Wallace. As you will see, we are missing one panelist, the great Congressman Jamie Raskin. There's a chance he might join us. He's otherwise occupied. He's on the Hill doing serious things. But if he does show up, we'll make space for him. We'll incorporate him into the conversation, and we'll proceed accordingly. I also want to make it clear that IPS is a 501c3 organization, so at least my questions will be within those parameters. We're nonpartisan. We care deeply about ideas and policy, but we're not advocating for any particular candidate or another. So just wanted to make that clear at the outset. I'm really excited about this panel. We're calling it Defending and Reimagining Democracy. And I want to introduce our fantastic panelists. To my left is Lisa Gilbert. She is co-president of Public Citizen and co-founder of the Not Above the Law Coalition. She leads efforts on government ethics, corporate accountability, and defending democracy from authoritarian challenges. Thank you for joining us, Lisa. To her left is Osita Nwanevu. He's a contributing editor at the New Republic and columnist for The Guardian. His forthcoming debut book is called The Right of the People, Democracy and the Case for a New American Founding. It offers a bold vision for rebuilding democratic institutions. Thank you so much for joining us, Osita.
Thank you.
I wanted to start with a question for both of you, and it's taken from an essay that we've spent a lot of time thinking about and reading at the Institute for Policy Studies. It's Henry Wallace's infamous 1944 New York Times essay that's called The Dangers of American Fascism. I want to quote a passage from that piece and then ask you to respond to it. Wallace wrote, "The American fascist would prefer not to use violence. His method is to poison the channels of public information. With a fascist, the problem is never how best to present the truth to the public, but how best to use the news to deceive the public into giving the fascist and his group more money or more power." So my question to both of you is, in this age of disinformation, media consolidation, and assaults on democratic truth, what strategies can we use to reimagine a public sphere built on transparency, equity, and collective trust? And I wanted to start with you, Lisa.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and Public Citizen is also thrilled to be one of the co-hosts of today's event, so just want to appreciate everyone else who's been here all day. This is an important question in this moment. I think information has become ever channeled into silos. People only view trusted validators as the sources where they can glean what they depend on. That means different things to different people. To young people, that may mean they get their information from TikTok. To those who still tune into cable news, it's MSNBC, it's Fox, it's these very different perspectives. And I think it's almost impossible to break through those silos. And there isn't really a current silver bullet to do so, but I completely agree with the premise that these silos are exploited by authoritarianism, by fascism, by those that want to put forth a particular perspective. They know they can get it into one of the silos and then have it permeate till it feels like it's the truth. So a couple of things we can do, which are all unfortunately fairly long term, but one way to think about tackling this problem is making sure that tech platforms are actually held accountable for what they put forth. Mis and disinformation is currently just allowed, on the platforms that I mentioned. There's no accountability from Meta or the other entities that allow it to percolate. We can't trust companies to self-police on this, and so the requirement is legislation to put guardrails into place and regulations that follow. So just putting it out there as one solution. I think the other one I want to proffer is putting truth up, propping truth up, and giving it more air. I think there are still other trusted validators. There are local businesses, there are educators, there are mayors, there are people that in local communities are trusted. So figuring out ways to ensure that those voices are also loud. I think one way to counter mistruth is to pull the truth up and make sure more people hear it. So that's the other thing I'll put forward as a solution that we should grapple with today.
Yeah, on my end, as far as specific and concrete strategies are concerned, I've always been a fan of public media, going back to when I was learning my ABCs with Sesame Street. And, I think that there is something really, really important and valuable, and you see this in Europe especially, about having a journalistic infrastructure that is at least partially non-commercial, non-partisan, not designed to sell you something, not designed to push your buttons, but to get you the information that you need. And we really need to invest in that more seriously in this country. We never have. I mean, we're in this point where obviously the public media is under attack in a new way, but we've never invested as much as we should have in public radio and PBS and these kinds of things. We should do more, and we should do more specifically, I think, to revive state and local journalism in particular. I think one of the things that people have come to understand or to believe is that we have ourselves in this kind of nationalized political environment, partially because people used to have the means to understand what was going on in their state house, what was going on when it came to funding a particular school or road. This was the kind of political information people were taking in back in the day. And in the absence of the newspapers that used to provide that information, people now get their political news and information from nationalized sources. They play into or feed into nationalized narratives, and that's how they understand their entire world. And I'm not saying that there's something intrinsically wrong necessarily with national narratives, and I'm not saying that you can't be a demagogue about potholes. You can be a demagogue about anything. And obviously local issues can be very contentious, but I think we're all understanding now that there's something fundamentally out of whack with our politics, and that's partially because people don't have the means to see materially, concretely, what are people doing in politics that affects me directly in a concrete way in my community. Instead of that material, they're reaching for extraneous things. They're talking about Jeffrey Epstein. They're talking about the green M&M. They're talking about all this nonsense. And I think that that's not healthy. And I think that one of the ways we can fight back against that is rebuilding a real journalistic infrastructure, particularly when it comes to covering state and local politics in particular.
That's really appropriate, especially considering what's happening now. I mean, like on the Hill, there's a pushback against PBS and public media, so your words are incredibly important. Osita, I wanted to stick with you. I'm among many who's been reading your work for quite some time, and so I join a bunch of people who are really excited about your new book that's coming out. Again, I'll mention the title. It's called The Right of the People, Democracy and the Case for a New Founding, which is being described as a bold case for reimagining the American project and making American democracy real. We have spent a lot of time today talking about democracy and what it means and who it applies to, and how to reconstruct and reimagine democracy. I had another question for you, but I hope you don't mind if I ask you a slightly different question. What do we mean by new American founding? Why is that part of the title of your book?
Well, I mean, it's a call to, I think, really fulfill the promise of American democracy. One of the provocations of the book is that I don't really think we have a very democratic system, and we should see democracy in America as not something that they did 230-something years ago that we have to dust off and protect. That is an ongoing project of creation that we need to invest ourselves in. We should see ourselves as founders. There wasn't just one generation 2 centuries ago that founded democracy for all time. We, on the basis of, I think, more egalitarian principles than they had, knowing more about governance than they do, knowing more political science than they did, have as much of a right, if not more, to see ourselves as part of the project of fundamentally reworking, renewing, actually, from my perspective, creating American democracy for the first time. And that's a bold thing to say, but I think that that's where you land when you think from first principles about what democracy actually means. It's a word we've come to take for granted. We use it all the time casually. But democracy is extremely complicated. It's a thicket of vexing ideas. And we're in a place now, obviously, too, where many Americans don't take it for granted as much as we might in this room, that democracy is a good system, that it has values and virtues that are worth preserving. And I think that Donald Trump succeeded in politics partially on that basis. There are people who didn't really think that he was either a threat to democracy, or to the extent that he was, they thought that there are more important things that they should vote on. And that's dangerous. We need to be making an affirmative, robust case for democracy. If what we tried out in this past, I'm saying we, what the Democratic Party tried out in November clearly did not resonate with the kind of people that it needed to resonate with. And so we're in a position now of having to articulate a robust defense of democracy. And I think we're going to be in a bad position to do that if we're not defining it really kind of coherently and tightly. So in all that I read and all that I worked through in writing this book, I really could not find a more succinct and coherent definition of democracy than the one that Abraham Lincoln functionally gave in the Gettysburg Address. Democracy is government by the people, of the people, by the people, and for the people. And another way of putting that is democracy is a system in which the governed themselves govern. They're not entrusting governance to some higher, superior authority. They are not...
Anti-democratic forces
are at work here, always. You have to remain vigilant at all times. You know, they're not entrusting governance to some other higher authority that's better than them. They themselves are taking upon the responsibility of governing themselves, right? And that sounds, jeez Louise. That sounds all well and good, but you know, I think to really get a kind of granular sense of what democracy means, you have to think about the principles at work within a democratic system. I think there are three that you really have to emphasize. One is equality. Everybody who is party to a democratic decision has to be in equal standing. If that's not the case, you leave the door open to some superior class of people being the ones that actually get to make the decisions that matter. A democratic system is responsive to the governed. When the governed speak, they speak with authority, and the system is obligated to respond in some way to what they've asserted. And the last thing is majority rule, or majoritarianism. There are a lot of different ways a group might make a decision collectively, but majority rule is the only one consistent within the principle of equality. When 3 people want something and 2 people want some other thing, there is no way that the 2 people win out unless there's some kind of inequality at work, right? These seem like very basic, commonsensical principles. I think that people kind of accept them when you say them that way. And yet, we live in a political system that flouts all of these things in basic ways. We are sitting right now in a city, Washington, D.C., of 700,000 people who do not have a full and equal voice in the federal government. They're among the 4 million Americans for whom that is true. The one delegate that D.C. has in the House, Eleanor Holmes Norton, does not have a vote on the final passage of legislation in the House and in Congress. That is democratically untenable. D.C. is in fact governed more intimately than other parts of the country in their municipal government because it is a constitutionally created city. It has become the plaything of Republican members of Congress in other parts of the country, right? But there are 4 million Americans for whom this is true, mostly in Puerto Rico. And I don't think there's an honest definition of democracy that allows us to say that those people are living in democracy today. They're not. Even those of us who do have some kind of a say do not have an equal say, obviously so. California has a population of about 40 million people. If it were its own country, it would be one of the 40 largest in the world, one of the largest economies in the world. Has the very same number of seats in the Senate as Wyoming, a city with, I think, under 600,000 people. It's smaller, in fact, than Washington, D.C., right? And so on a mathematical basis, when you divide representation by the population of each state, that resident of Wyoming has about 67 times representation in the Senate as a resident of California, right? That's not a purely academic fact. That matters. That disparity speaks to the reasons why we can't, pass the gun control policies most people in this country want. We can't pass the immigration laws, immigration reform most people in this country want. We can't do the environmental work most people in this country want. And I think it speaks also to why the President of the United States can send troops into Los Angeles without having to worry very much about what the people of Los Angeles think, or that that's going to have some kind of political backlash against him, because it might not. California is, again, not represented adequately in the Senate, not an important state when it comes to winning the Electoral College. This matters, and I think we're in a position where we can no longer pretend that it doesn't matter. It does. It shapes policymaking. The Senate shapes the judiciary. It shapes the executive branch. And these disparities are only getting worse and worse with time. And I think that we're at a point where if we want to really solve the problems we face in this country, We have to deal with these basic inequities, or we're not going to, and we're going to find ourselves pulled more deeply and more rapidly towards authoritarianism.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for that. Lisa, one of the reasons I'm so glad that you're here is because you've been thinking about the question of tech and policy and politics. And a few times we've mentioned here on this platform the rise of AI and its ubiquity. It's everywhere. Everyone's using it. In my other life, I teach at Georgetown, and my students are using it. Everyone's using it all the time. And I don't think we've fully grappled with a few things. One, just how profoundly it will unsettle society. It'll change our relationships with each other and with power. And secondly, the sheer amount of money that's flooding in to these companies, the sheer amount of insane money, which means power that's flowing to these companies that are putting out these chatbots and whatever successor technologies take their place. I wanted to ask you, what are the key threats posed by tech money in politics right now, and how should progressives respond to that?
Well, it's a very provocative question, so thank you. I think that tech money, corporate money in general, but tech money in particular, has become one of the most pervasive forces in democracy over the last 2 years. They become one of the most dominant players in our elections. And, it's the traditional big four tech companies like Meta and Apple, but it is also these new entities. It's AI, it's crypto. Crypto in particular was one of the biggest players in 2024. 44% of all of the corporate money that came in came from crypto backers. It's a massive amount. And an even wilder stat is that money is 15% of all of the corporate money that has been spent since Citizens United 15 years ago. It's an insane volume. It's hard to even quantify. And even crazier when you think about the fact that crypto's only been around for a couple of election cycles. 92% of the money they've ever spent was in 2024. So it's hard to get our arms around this, but the volume is massive. And what that brings is immediate dividends to policymakers. They poured most of this money through a PAC they called Fair Shake. It was not partisan. It went to Democrats and Republicans with the idea that they should prop up those that are supportive of crypto and take down those that are skeptics. And we're already seeing the consequences. Even before this new Congress came in, before Trump got here, one of the SEC commissioners, the minority commissioner, she went through unanimously in the last Congress. She was painted as a crypto opponent, and she couldn't even get a hearing in the banking committee because people were so nervous about crossing crypto. And we're seeing it now. We're seeing it actually today. There are votes on pieces of legislation, stablecoin bills that will make it easier for crypto to permeate. We've seen the idea of a reserve, a Bitcoin reserve for the nation. And even worse, the absurdist, profit off the presidency action of Trump having his own meme coin. I'm sure you all saw he advertised, we think illegally, his meme coin by, offering people a private dinner at his golf course, offering people, tours of the White House with him there, so they would buy more of his meme coin while he is in the Oval Office. So the levels of corruption surrounding crypto and AI, focusing on crypto because of the sheer amounts of money, but AI money is also flowing. It's really intense, and I think it's definitely changing in real time how politicians are voting and what is happening in Washington. So what should progressives do? What should everybody do? The remedies are actually not new. Corporate money has been a problem since Citizens United and before, but exacerbated by that decision 15 years ago. What we need to do first and foremost is overturn the Citizens United decision. Short of that, on our way to that, we also need more disclosure of how the money is flowing so we can better understand how these decisions are being made. We need shareholders to have more checks on the corporate money that's flowing. There's a reputational risk associated with corporations playing in politics, publicly traded ones, so we need to provide checks through shareholder democracy. And then we need public financing, which is something I know we'll talk about more later in the panel, but we need to give regular people a louder voice in the meantime so we can combat and level the playing field from what these corporations are doing.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for that focus on crypto as well. That's also incredibly important. Osita, part of the reason why we're holding this conversation, we're having all these conversations today, is because we want to focus on vision and what it means to have vision, especially at this moment, at this juncture in American history. The difficulty of coming up with a vision that empowers people and encompasses our ambitions, but that is also enables us to kind of work consistently towards a goal and to achieve it. I was going back to read some of your work, and I came across this quote in an essay that you wrote for the New Republic in 2020. I'll read it now and then ask you to respond to it. So this was a few years ago, but I think it still applies in so many ways. You wrote, "A substantial portion of the American electorate and many of our political elites value technocratic and administrative competence, or the appearance of either, over political vision. Another enemy of progress is a political culture that dissuades us from pursuing grand schemes, no matter how much we might want them." What does it look like to build a political culture that encourages political vision and makes it achievable?
Well, I mean, I think that part of that is supporting and fostering people, candidates, leaders who offer that vision. When a candidate like Zoran Mamdani, for instance, comes around, you don't harangue that person with a bunch of nonsense, even if you disagree with them on certain things. You try to work with them and establish a dialogue with them. And funnily enough, that piece was in part about Andrew Cuomo, who in this period was kind of an American hero, was being framed as one by the press, and I couldn't really figure out for the life of me why. I mean, he was doing things that were very similar to what other governors were doing, but he was also doing these press conferences where he told people, you know, to cover their mouths when they were coughing, and this made him like a great statesman or something. And you know, and I wrote, you know, part of this piece about, you know, my puzzling at why that was, and I think what I came down to is that Andrew Cuomo is somebody who projected competence, projected a particular kind of leadership and ability. He doesn't have, you know, grand political visions and schemes and so on, but he knows how to get things done, and that's what really counts. And I think that's the basis upon which I think a lot of the people in the press lionized him at the time, and the people in the Democratic Party did, even though, and this is before we knew about the nursing home scandal, even though people were making, you know, critiques of his administration. And frankly, I think that's the basis upon which, in this last election, people rallied behind him. It was about this kind of image of competency and control, and that kind of vision of what leadership is about. Even though he left office, you know, in as much disgrace as a politician can, and that was it was a real, I don't know, it was striking to see people in the Democratic Party in New York City rally behind them in spite of that. So I think part of it is having a different sense of the kinds of politicians and candidates and leaders we even want and desire and are willing to put our faith and support it. And I think that Mamdani is one of those people, and you know, there's a lot we can learn, I think, about the fact that he's been treated the way that he has. We're in this conversation now, too, I should say, about policy bottlenecks and difficulties that we have in building and achieving great things, the abundance agenda, and the extent to which we are shooting ourselves in the foot with certain policy mechanisms that we ought to change. Now, I think that there are reasonable and important debates to be had in that realm. We don't have to get into in this particular point in time. But I think that one of the other obstacles is, look, if you think that we should be changing certain things about policymaking in order to achieve big things, you have to be telling people that we want to achieve big things. You have to have a vision that animates the desire to improve, to reform, to remake those bottlenecks in the first place. And I think we have a lot of people making technocratic complaints about technocratic issues without this kind of larger vision. What is the actual thing that you think we're going to do when we fix this stuff? What is the actual large-scale vision you have for reforming American healthcare, reforming housing in this country, reforming the environment? Like, what is the large-scale grand plan that you have? Because that, for I think a lot of people, is the stuff of politics, especially at a point now where our problems are so large and getting larger. You have to have a kind of background vision, and again, I think that part of having that is fostering, supporting, backing candidates who speak in those terms about politics.
Thank you. I also want to note that in about 10 minutes, I'll be asking for questions. So if you have any questions in mind, we'll use the same system we've been using. You'll get a note card and a pen if you need it. You can write the question, and then I'll take the question up here. Kind of staying in this realm, Lisa, about like sort of, I guess, the influence of money in politics and how some candidates are pushing against that. Public Citizen has championed expanding public financing of elections. How might small dollar donor systems and public financing reshape not just campaign funding, but who runs for office and ultimately who democracy serves?
So we are longtime champions of public financing. As you know, I've already mentioned it as one of the remedies we think is incredibly important. Right now, our political system favors those who have a Rolodex and can reach out to major donors, and it makes it incredibly unempowering for everyone else. The idea that what you need to run for office are connections and big dollars, and if you don't have that, you cannot step up to the plate, is incredibly discouraging and really hinders the diversity of those who can run. So public financing, first and foremost, allows more people to take the stage, to step up to the plate, whatever metaphor you want, and run. In addition, it grapples with one of the systemic problems in our system, which is that people do not trust that politicians are there for anything but their big dollar donors. The whole example I ran through around crypto, I mean, it's illustrative of the realities of our political system right now. If you run for office, you are absolutely going to take into account those who give you the money that made it possible, and they're K Street lobbyists. So taking that out of the equation by leveling the playing field, by allowing regular people to also have a voice and to contribute in an equal way, just changes the dynamic incredibly. And hopefully, if we ever have it implemented at the federal level, it will help to begin to rebuild trust in government, which is sorely lacking right now. There are a number of different types of systems. There is a system wherein you give a contribution and then it is matched at a 5-to-1 rate or a 6 or 9-to-1 rate, so elevating your contribution. There are systems in some states where vouchers are provided, where you can use that to contribute to politics. Systems where there are tax breaks or incentives for contributing a small dollar amount. Whatever system is put into place, the point is to make sure that regular people, that all of our voices are equal to that of the corporate and special interest dollar donors who right now have the power.
Thank you for that, and really well stated. I think anyone who knows me knows that I'm obsessed with the intersection between culture and politics and policy, and the fact that we need to be attuned to what's happening and speak to culture in all kinds of ways. And that needs to be a relationship that goes in both directions. And Osita, you've written about this as well. I particularly loved reading an essay that you wrote for the New Republic, I think it was last year, if I'm not mistaken, about Tom Wolfe. It's a piece about Tom Wolfe and how pop culture became central to serious criticism. And you write, being articulate about the inarticulable for Wolfe demanded the adoption of a now standard critical posture, taking popular culture seriously and viewing its products and developments as worthy of close study, if not respect. How can progressive movements harness pop culture, not just high art or critical literature, but the everyday cultural narratives and spectacles that shape public life, to articulate a richer democratic imagination and help reweave a shared public culture?
So I have a lot of thoughts about this. I mean, I guess I have a lot of thoughts about everything. But it's something I've been thinking about a lot, especially as I've kind of finished this book and looked at the next things I'm working on. One of the things I've always been interested in politics is the fact that conservatives have a cultural agenda and progressives don't really to the same extent. Conservatives really, really care about cultural power and cultural influence. If you talk to people on the right during the first Trump administration, you'd hear them say things all the time like, progressives have all the power in this country, the left rules this country. And you say to them, what are you talking about? You have the presidency, you have the Senate, you have or had the House, you just locked in a majority on the Supreme Court for God knows how long. You control state governments totally across this country. What are you talking about? And they'll say something like, well, I saw a transgender person on Good Morning America, and that's what really counts, Conservatives care about culture because I think that they have a particular vision of what they want from American society and the role culture plays there. And they're thinking about this and talking about this all the time. We, on our hand, I mean, there's certain policy issues where musicians and actors and so on come to Congress to talk about rights and this kind of thing. Obviously, we support things like arts education. Beyond politics, we push for more representation in Hollywood. We push for changing certain narratives, and all of those things are important. But we don't have kind of high aspirations and expectations for culture, I think, in the same way the conservatives do on the basis of their values. But culture matters for politics, and obviously so for a few different reasons. One, it's one of the sources of our political ideas. Two, it is a meaningfully important sector of the economy. It's about 5 million workers, about $1 trillion of GDP, before you talk about the second order effects. But the third thing, and I think the most important thing, is that culture is a basic need. It's not the same kind of need as food or healthcare or housing, but we do need stories and art and music and have from the beginning of time. And I think because it's a basic need, we also have a kind of obligation to make sure that we are providing quality and providing innovation. We're not just rehashing the same things over and over and over again. We're always giving people new ideas, new ways to see themselves and their lives and the world around them. And those are expectations we should have of culture, partially because when we do that, we actually grow the economy. When we innovate culturally, we produce new things that creates jobs, in a very basic way, but also, there's this existential question I think is important. I think this all has a lot to do with democracy, and people in the 19th century took it for granted that there was a connection here. So if you read Democracy in America, Alexis de Tocqueville, as was common for his time, makes the argument that aristocratic societies, European societies, those are the kinds of societies where you're going to see the highest and best in culture, that there was something about democratic society and equality that would lower standards. And we produce things that would be okay in America, but nothing as great as the Europeans did. And the funny thing about it was that around this time we started proving them wrong, with Herman Melville and Emily Dickinson and Mark Twain and Walt Whitman. And it was Whitman specifically, in his book Democratic Vistas, which every American should read, he makes the direct democratic counter-argument, which is that when you actually take the intrinsic worth and value and dignity of every single human being as a first principle, and you create a system and you create a society in which they are empowered and given agency, you're actually going to have creative flourishing, people coming up with new ideas and new things that the world has never seen before. And for a very, very long time in this country, we proved Whitman right. The explosion of creativity in America from the 1850s, I want to say, through 2000, is unlike anything in the history of civilization on every front, whether you're talking about visual art, music, jazz, rock and roll, hip hop, theater, the film industry. We were creating in ways that we can't even fathom now. The amount of creative energy we had in this country. You look at the highest grossing movies of 1975, or 1972, 50 years ago. You'd see a lot of like dumb garbage. Sure, yeah, that was always the case. But you always see like The Godfather and Dog Day Afternoon and these kinds of things. Now we've got like Ant-Man 17 or the Cap and Crunch cinematic universe or something. We're doing Superman again. I've heard that it's fine. I might see it, I might not, but if I don't see it, I know I can catch it the next time we do it in 2030. But the thing that's important to understand though about Superman is that there was a time when Superman was a new thing in the world, a new idea, derived from certain sources, yes, but the product of the imaginations of people from Jewish immigrant families in this country. And it's the case for a lot of the superheroes, We provided that as a new way, a new kind of story to tell, and we gave that to the world. And if the people 100 years ago, or 1930s rather, who came up with the first superheroes had said to themselves, actually, we're just going to do what we did 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and keep reading that, we never would have had them, right? This really matters to me. As somebody who, journalism was my third choice. I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I decided to take the more lucrative and stable path of print journalism. But it really, I think it really matters. I think it really matters in a concrete policy sense. We were talking just a few minutes ago about AI, and I won't say all the things that I have to say about AI here because we'd be here all evening. Um, but artificial intelligence and the LLM models that we have now are models that are based upon the regurgitation of what has come before. And materials that are used to do this are materials that have been stolen. I wish the Congressman Raskin were here, because I don't understand why nobody in Congress seems to care about this at all. If you are a hip hop artist in this country, and if you want to sample somebody else's song, you have to legally clear that song. Otherwise, you might end up in legal trouble. If you are OpenAI or Anthropic or Meta or one of these companies, because you have so much money, and because you have all of these resources, you can take in, and this is not an exaggeration, literally every book ever written in the English language, all the TV show scripts, all the movie scripts, all the photographs and all the illustrations on the internet. You can steal that, put it into a meat grinder, and then charge people for access to the crank, where they can churn out whatever slop they want out of it. This, to me, is a real pivot point in the culture of this country. And it matters for concrete material reasons. Even if you don't have like the high existential whatever that I was talking about, those kinds of concerns, workers are being replaced. Photographers, writers, musicians are being replaced by this. And I think instead we should have a kind of cultural agenda as progressives that says that that is wrong, that if we're going to have this technology, we should have it in a way that respects workers and respects their creativity and respects what they've done. And we can't let this be the logical end result of the way Silicon Valley has worked, where we had an illegal taxi company that just because they were out there first and were bold enough and brazen enough, we have Uber. We had an illegal hotel company because they were bold and brazen enough. We had Airbnb. Now we have something that is going to upend the entire, this entire framework of laws we've had in this country for years and years and years, and nobody cares. And it's having a real impact on real workers already in the creative industry. So all of that is, my long-winded way of saying, culture matters for all kinds of reasons, and I think that we're at a moment now where progressives have to stand up and say that culture matters and protect people who produce it, and urge us to continue being the innovative and extraordinary society that we've been in the past.
Thank you for that, and you're right, we could talk about that more, and I would love to continue that conversation, so perhaps we'll find another venue to do so. I've gotten a number of questions from the audience. I haven't had a chance to sort them, so how about we just do like a potpourri? I'll read a few, and you can respond to them as the spirit moves you. So this question goes, how do we expand the definition of democracy beyond elections? Necessary because there is so much disillusionment with electoral politics. That's one. Let's see. I'm not sure what this says.
I'm sure it's great.
I don't know. It's yeah, we'll skip. What are your thoughts on to what degree ranked choice voting provides a hopeful electoral reform to diffuse the polarization of our politics that keeps us divided and conquered? That's another one, and I'll read one more. What can be done to overturn Citizens United? So very easy topics at hand here.
Yeah.
Sure.
Whichever.
Well, expanding the definition of democracy is a really good question. I think in this moment where we are seeing this litany of lawlessness from this administration, a slide towards authoritarianism that is very different from what we experienced in the first term. We're seeing a sitting judge arrested. We're seeing a sitting congressperson arrested just for doing her oversight responsibilities. We're seeing attacks on different pillars of democracy, on nonprofits, on media, on universities. It's this kind of systematic undercutting of things that we have trusted for an incredibly long time. It's ignoring due process. It's defying court orders. It's this really long laundry list that I could keep saying. And I think part of our challenge is to figure out the cohesive narrative that pulls it all together and fight back And we've been trying to do that at Public Citizen. It's Tope mentioned earlier our Not Above the Law coalition. A big part of our work right now is trying to create a cohesive narrative that weaves this all together so we can at least describe the attack and then figure out how to fight back. And I think our conclusion, as we've pulled it into a narrative, is that what we need to do is mobilize and use this narrative to mobilize. I'm sure many of you were at the No Kings events, which happened last month. 1,500 around the country with this "let's fight authoritarianism" narrative at the forefront. We don't want a king. I hope many of you are coming tonight to our next iteration of this. We're making good trouble in John Lewis's memory. 1,640 events all around the country calling for democracy and defining what's happening right now, this authoritarian slide that we're in. So I think, first thing is to define the problem, and it's robust and bigger than anything we've ever seen in this country. Second is to organize and take to the streets and call it out, and then to keep that momentum up as we continue to build engagement from many across our country to reach the point where we can fight in such a way that there is no recourse for the administration.
Are we taking all of them at once?
Oh.
Do I just run through?
Yeah, whatever one you want to take.
Okay. I'll do it lightning for a couple of them, and then maybe do a longer one for one of them.
Sounds good.
Ranked choice voting is good. So this, when I was talking earlier about how we take certain things about democracy for granted, or we take the word for granted without thinking it through, it should matter to us that in most of the elections in this country, if you win 40-something% of the vote, but most people don't want you to be elected, you can still win, as long as you have more votes than the next guy. That's not majority rule, right? So that should be democratically troubling to us, and we don't really think about it. Ranked choice voting is a way to address that particular problem, but there's a particular configuration of ranked choice voting, as I think the questioner was implying, that political scientists have said would actually lead to the formation, potentially, of new parties. If we combine it with proportional representation, which also has its own benefits, we could sort of work our way out of the two-party duopoly gradually, and I think it's worth exploring for that reason. But even on a smaller scale where we've seen it put into practice, there's a different kind of campaigning at work in elections where we've seen ranked choice voting. Because people rank different candidates and rank them multiple candidates at a time, you have people working together and interacting with each other in different kind of ways. They're friendlier to each other. Look at what happened in the Democratic primary between Brad Lander and Zoran Mamdani, right? So those kinds of interactions are incentivized by ranked choice voting, and I think that kind of thing is good. Overturning Citizens United. Maybe you have a better idea of how to do this than I do.
I'll give it a go when you're done.
Right now, I think functionally what we have to do is kind of wait for a lot of people to die. That's how our judicial system works. I don't know what you were going to say. But at the Supreme Court, look, we're one of the few countries in the world that has lifetime appointments for our judges. It's an insane system. No countries don't do this. And so I've been one of the people who says we should actively consider, when Democrats next have the chance, putting more people on the Supreme Court, and actually maybe if we can, working towards a long-term bipartisan solution there, where we're not just relying on, we're getting health updates on whether somebody fell, 2 weeks ago to see if we're going to have abortion rights in this country. Like it's an insane system. It's gone on for too long. The other question, which I think was expanding the concept of democracy. So one of the big things I talk about in this book is the concept of economic democracy, which is a phrase that used to be used more commonly in our politics. Roosevelt said it, Martin Luther King referred to it, JFK referred to it. We don't really talk about it very much anymore. People mean by it different things, but what it means for me is this. If we desire democracy because it gives us a measure of control over the conditions that shape our lives, we should desire that not just in politics, where we go to the ballot box, but we should desire it within the economy, including at work. We spend about a third of our lives at work. The decisions that are made at the top of the corporations or firms we work for often affect us more immediately, intimately, and directly than decisions being made in Washington, D.C., or state houses, or in City Hall. And yet we take it for granted that workers are not entitled to a basic level of voice at the firms they work for. We take it for granted that an Amazon warehouse workers, say, should have the right, and they should, to voice their opinion on our foreign policy with Russia or Iran. But they don't have a say in how Amazon is run. They don't have a say in how their basic work is structured. And that is democratically troubling. It's a question that democratic theorists have kind of worked around for years, and people have different ideas about it. But for me, giving workers more agency and control at work is something that would actually help us deal with the problem of inequality in new ways. There are all kinds of policy mechanisms in Europe, whether it's co-determination or works councils that we could explore, that would give workers a level of say, level of agency they don't have here. We obviously need to rebuild traditional labor unions as well. All of these things, I think, intersect together in important ways in building labor power. But that's not a conversation we've had very seriously in this country, and I think that we should. We're now in a place where pretty soon we're going to have the first trillionaire in the world. We just saw Elon Musk for the low price of $260 million purchase a seat in government that he used to implement the policies that he wanted. We can't pretend that the economy and politics are two different realms anymore. I think it's important for us to push for campaign finance reform, lobbying reform, overturning Citizens United on the political side of things. But one of the reasons why it's been so hard to do that is that we have a level of any economic inequality that allows the wealthy to influence the political system and prevent us from getting those things done. You have to get at the wealth itself on some level, or you're not going to have a democracy. And I think that it's time for us to take that challenge seriously.
The only thing I will add on the Citizens United question, so at Public Citizen, we've run a very long, 10 years or so campaign passing state-level resolutions in support of an amendment. So the thing you can do in the near term, as I completely agree, the Supreme Court, the Roberts Court, as I prefer to call it, is unethical. There's no code of ethics. They should have term limits. We should have more justices. There are numerous things we should do to improve the court. But in the interim, you can create the momentum around the nation that helps us eventually hit that high bar, which is a constitutional amendment. So at this point, we've got a very large number of states and counties and municipalities that have supported on their own a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, and the momentum does continue to build.
Let's end on one question. We're almost at our finish time here. We've talked a little bit today about the importance of everyday people stepping up and running for office and taking charge of their communities and stepping forward and doing the good work that we need to see. So here's the question that I'm really intrigued by. It says, I'm a Gen Zer planning on running in 2026. I am an underdog in my local county council race. What is your advice? That's the both of you. Okay, there you go.
Advice on running? Well, if I knew things about that, I don't think I'd be a journalist. I mean, it's really hard. One of the other things I've thought about too and written about some is the age of candidacy laws we have in this country. They don't make any sense. I think that if you are an adult, you should have your full slate of political rights given to you. You shouldn't have this kind of helter-skelter. If you're 25, you can do this. You're 21, you can do it. It doesn't make any sense. And it's politically egalitarian. And so if we're talking about constitutional amendments and the prospect of passing them, I think it's extremely difficult. But if that's another one, in addition to amending Citizens United, that I would push for, changing age of candidacy laws at the federal level in this country, and actually establishing below that if you're 18, you should be able to run for any office in the land. But as far as practical advice for running is concerned, I don't know, I'd just say, listen to the people in your community, listen to what they say their problems are, and try to, as we talked about at the very beginning, try to sort of detach to the extent that you can from these national narratives, sort of understand what are the issues that are affecting your life directly that nobody else is talking about, nobody else may even know about, but that somebody in local government could do something to fix and help. I think, sadly, I think that doing that might just set you apart from a lot of candidates for office these days, but it's really important. Sort of focus on the actual problems that people tell you upon reflection that they care the most about, and don't make assumptions about what those necessarily are. Beyond that, I don't know. Good luck.
It's a really good question, and I hope for your chances. I think the moment of having the tools that you may be able to use more effectively than other older candidates, using social media more effectively, using influencer tools, thinking about how to reach back to those silos that I was talking about at the top. You know your contemporaries and your constituents, hopefully, and can figure out what messages resonate and push them through these channels in a more effective way, perhaps. So, recommendation one is just use the tools you have for the things that you've learned. And the other one is just also use the old school tools, knock on the doors, go talk to the people, because I do think that that's a huge part of democracy, that participatory engagement and making sure that you actually talk to people on the ground so you understand what the concerns are.
Thank you, and thanks so much to both of you. I'm so sad that we have to end the conversation here, but it's truly been a pleasure and an honor to have you both. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are at the end. It's been a tremendous honor to have this conversation with all of you, to kind of think through this moment and to think about vision and what we have to do to make the pivot. Before we end, part of the reason we're here is because of our Wallace Fellows. They've been helping throughout the day, and they've done incredible work. I'd like to ask them to stand. Wallace Fellows, please stand if you're here. A tremendous crop and group of people. Thank you so much for being here. I said a little bit of this at the outset, but my staff has asked me to read it again, so I shall. I serve at their pleasure. As a reminder, the Institute for Policy Studies is a nonpartisan 501c3 nonprofit organization. We do not weigh in on elections or candidates, nor do we endorse or oppose political candidates or political parties. Any individuals who share their thoughts or ideas on particular candidates or election outcomes are speaking purely in their own individual capacity and not on behalf of IPS as an organization. I also want to acknowledge our partners, The Nation magazine, which has been a wonderful, wonderful partner for us. Public Citizen, shout out to Public Citizen. Thank you so very much to the Wallace Global Fund. We are indebted to you. We thank you for your longstanding support of IPS. We're so grateful. As all of you know, it takes so many people to make something like this happen, and I'm just so blessed to have an incredible set of colleagues who are tireless, who work so hard to make something like this happen. I want to give a couple shout outs right now. Special thanks to Tim, Ashley, Sonia, Deja, John, Netfa, Kathleen, and Sarah G for making this event possible.